Sea rescuers. For generations, they've been risking their lives for seamen, day and night, and in all weather conditions. Their motto, we head out to sea when others seek safe haven.
Of course, there are difficult situations.
Their mission, to help in any situation.
I thought, you'll be gone in another 5 minutes.
The training, as realistic as possible. The missions, sometimes extremely dangerous.
These are forces you can't define.
The Hermann Helms is a 27.5-meter class search and rescue cruiser. Stationed in Cuxhaven, it operates in the North Sea. The crew, a tight-knit community.
It's like guys sharing an apartment.
Daily life, enjoying the calm before the storm.
We try to do everything possible.
It's night. A sharp wind is blowing. Alarm for the search and rescue cruiser Hermann Helms. Coxswain Timo Wieck and his team are getting ready for their mission. The team is experienced. One person mans the bridge. Below, another is waiting for the emergency doctor. He'll be urgently needed today at sea. Engineer Kai Schüps goes to the engine room, where he starts the powerful engines. Over 3,000 horsepower cause the Hermann Helms to tremble. The heavy-duty engines bring the ship up to speed and keep it safely on course. The systems have powered up. Emergency lights on the pier. The emergency doctor is arriving by ambulance. It's the on-call doctor from the city hospital. The Hermann Helms puts out to sea. The commands from the bridge are clear and apply to everyone, including the cameraman.
Switch the light off, I can't see.
If the helmsman is blinded, it causes serious danger. The radar shows large vessels on their way to Hamburg. There's not much room for evasive maneuvers. The emergency doctor is also given a life jacket. He doesn't yet know what awaits him. The emergency call was received by radio.
According to the fire department or the rescue coordination center, a patient who's recently had surgery has burst her wound and is bleeding severely.
10 miles to the destination, the Hermann Helms sets its course. The engines are running as the search and rescue cruiser pushes on through the dark night.
The first thing you think is, what's the sea like? What's the weather like? And then, of course, you start thinking about the case.
Not a lot is known. A small sports boat is bobbing around out in the waves. An injured woman who urgently requires assistance is on board. The sea is rough tonight. Was the crew surprised?
The wind's very blustery with squalls today. They might have set off in wind force 2 or 3 when they felt safe, and then it got up to 6 or 7.
Weather like that isn't a problem for the Hermann Helms, but it complicates the mission. The plan is still to bring the injured woman on board the Hermann Helms and treat her there.
We have the standard equipment for extended first aid here, so we can easily provide basic care. We doctors also carry strong painkillers that are issued to us personally. So in this specific case, we can immediately provide treatment here on the table if necessary.
What's planned and what's possible aren't necessarily the same thing out here. The sea makes the rules. Heading out to sea when others seek safe haven. The motto of the German Maritime Search and Rescue Association. For over 150 years, the association's members have been risking their lives for seamen. Initially, they set out in rowboats when help was needed. The sea rescuers braved the wind and waves with the simplest of equipment. Not all of them returned. Back then, only one person stood on board at the vessel's prow issuing commands. The coxswain, a title that's still around to this day. The sea rescuers still trust in their own capabilities and their own material. The ships are custom made with pretty unique characteristics. They're built at the Fasma shipyard near Bremen. This is where Holger Frese works. The sea rescuer and engineer is planning the next generation of search and rescue cruisers.
What's special about our ships is that they're relatively fast and very seaworthy. That means they have to be shaped to move quickly in heavy seas to get where our help is needed. So they have to be light, stable, and fast enough. Everything that goes against ensuring that they're seaworthy.
Breakers and extremely heavy seas are often part and parcel of the sea rescuers' missions. Shipbuilders avoid using the term unsinkable. It doesn't exist. That also applies to the search and rescue ships. Nevertheless, they have a special feature that very few other ships possess. They can all completely capsize and then right themselves again. That's also put to the test, as shown here. But nobody wants to experience it.
Hopefully the crew has fastened their 4-point seatbelt so they can roll with the ship. What's interesting about the engines is that the oil doesn't remain in the sump when they're upside down. Normally the engine would then cut out. So we have a button that we can use to shut off the safety devices for the engines. You notice beforehand that the weather's so bad, it doesn't just come as a complete surprise. If I, as the skipper, have an automatic function that might shut something off and I don't need it, I have to remember to switch it off in good time beforehand.
The next generation search and rescue cruiser is being built here. It still looks like a shining giant, around 28 meters long and made entirely of aluminum. But the ship only has a draft of 2 meters. The daughter boats are also made completely of aluminum. With a length of 8 meters, they're designed for heavy seas too. Later, the screw will be driven through this shaft, with the engines supplying around 4,000 horsepower to the propellers. There's no room for mistakes.
This work is accurate to around 0.5 to 1 millimeter. Afterwards, it's finely adjusted to 2 or 3/100ths of a millimeter. That's how accurately the shafts from the propeller and through the transmission to the engine have to be aligned.
Not only the shaft involves precision work.
This is the wheelhouse where the ship is effectively controlled. Right now, all you can see is scaffolding. Later on, we'll be looking out onto the foredeck. The walls around the windows are 10 millimeters thick. The windows will be 19 millimeters thick. That also includes the inclination of the corners where breaking waves are to be anticipated. When we have really big waves with a swell of 6 meters out there and they rise to maybe 10 meters and break, tons of water crash onto the foredeck and can also reach to up here. And this structure has to be able to withstand that.
Holger Frese is looking for hairline cracks with a mirror. They can prove disastrous later on. The engineer has to check everything with precision. The ship has to withstand enormous forces, especially the bow.
These are forces you can't define. Once I was on board when we crashed into an uncharted sandbank at 20 knots. Anyway, the sister ship, or rather the previous ship, was certainly able to withstand that. Yeah, the crew, but not the dishwasher. It lost its door and everything inside.
The outer skin consists of 2 walls, so the ship can still sail even when it's leaking. Thanks to its special design, only a small part becomes flooded. A search and rescue cruiser like this one has an 8-figure price tag. Like everything the association does, the new build is financed by donations. Planning takes around 1 year, as does construction. Holger Frese claims he will have personally touched virtually every part of the finished ship.
Unlike a freighter, which is basically a hollow cavity for freight and is simple to build, we have a lot of technology in a tight space, like the daughter boat system, the folding stern, the automatic stern launching system, the electronics. Configuring and implementing that is the essence of special shipbuilding.
A peaceful morning in Cuxhaven. The search and rescue cruiser Hermann Helms is at its berth. Coxswain Timo Wieck and his crew are starting their active day duty. SAR, Search and Rescue, is written on the bow and is the search and rescue's mandate in Germany's territorial waters. The coastal area is akin to a marine freeway, which is why the sea rescuers' tasks and missions are so diverse. They might involve large ships in difficulty or with an injured person on board. But smaller vessels also trust in the search and rescue and its fleet.
It's never boring. Each mission is different, although it all sounds the same. A yacht's run aground or a motorboat has engine damage. The situations are always different. The weather, the sea level, the currents are different. Here in the Elbe, you also deal with a lot of commercial shipping.
The Hermann Helms is a 27.5-meter class search and rescue cruiser. The ship glides powerfully and quickly over the water. In calm seas and also in heavy swells, like this other search and rescue cruiser. If there's a fire, the crew mans the gigantic water cannons. Each can spray 18,000 liters of water per minute. The pressure is enormous. Due to the thrust alone, the cruiser is now traveling at over 10 kilometers per hour. The North Sea is far from calm. Here, the Hermann Helms is making its way to Helgoland. The ship has to withstand meter-high breakers and gale-force winds, which is what it's been built to do.
This is the lower wheelhouse, but we usually control the ship from above. That's because we can see people in the water better from up there. And secondly, the ship's more under the water than above it in bad weather. Down there, we just have water in the windows. Here we have the clear view windows. That's the only way we can see anything.
Steel shutters protect the ship from heavy breakers. Everything on board is fixed in place, including the flower pot. It could become a projectile in heavy seas. The crew also has to fasten their seatbelts in stormy weather.
Here's the lower wheelhouse seat with its seatbelts. It makes sense in seas with 6 to 8 meters waves. That's pretty violent. Then you go into free fall. If your belt isn't fastened, you can smash your head in the ceiling. It's the same at the sides.
On board, everyone is clear about their tasks. Coxswain Timo Wieck is in command. Arne Fröse is a navigator too and can steer the ship or the daughter boat. Horst Schöbel is more of a technician and right-hand man. And Kai Schöp's lair is below deck, the engine room. The steel gleams. The engines certainly don't look decades old.
We're most important, of course, because this wouldn't run without us. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to move anything.
And lots of things are moving in the engine room. Over 3,000 horsepower give the ship the necessary power. The reason for this cleanliness is simple. It makes leaks visible.
When you look at the bilges, everything's clean. You can spot an oil leak right away. We can see that something's wrong and we need to deal with it.
It only takes a few minutes for the Hermann Helms to set off on a mission because the engines are always at working temperature.
They're always preheated. That's normal for our heating system and the whole ship. They're preheated to about 40 degrees Celsius.
The engine is the heart of the search and rescue cruiser. The machines have to be reliable and function in even the most extreme situations. That also includes missions with air support. Because when speed is crucial, the sea rescuers call in the helicopters. Naval Air Wing 5 is stationed near Cuxhaven. Outside, the aircraft is being prepared. Inside, the mission briefing is taking place. Final details are being provided. Today, the helicopter will be meeting up with the Hermann Helms. Maneuvers are planned off the coast. The weather conditions are particularly important.
Air temperature 10 to 12 degrees Celsius, water temperature is just over 10, around 11 degrees, freezing level 090.
We talk through the conditions and the weather. We address problems and discuss the details of the entire flight again to rule out any misunderstandings. That's why this is so tough. There's no joking around. We discuss the flight in all seriousness.
In Cuxhaven, the Hermann Helms puts out to sea. The maneuvers with the German Army helicopter are routine but remain risky. The helicopter comes within a few meters of the ship and everything is in motion.
The weather and the current are always different. The helicopter only has to deal with the wind, but we have the wind, the downwash, and the current to contend with. The procedure is always the same, but the conditions on the water vary.
The helicopter is a Sea King. The four-man crew knows and trusts one another.
We all rely on one another, no matter what our position is on board. The two pilots at the front, the navigator or the flight engineer. We all have to rely on each other completely, because we're dependent on one another. We all want to get home safely.
The Hermann Helms reaches the target area. Coxswain Timo Wieck is controlling the ship from the bridge and has his eyes firmly on his surroundings and the instruments. Although this is an exercise, a mistake could prove fatal.
We're here in the Wadden Sea. It might look like we could go anywhere, but 200 meters in this direction and it's over. The water's too shallow. Then we have to break off. It's not so good when the helicopter's hovering over us and we suddenly run aground when we're reversing at 4 or 5 miles an hour. Then the helicopter might fly into our mast.
In Nordholz, the Sea King climbs into the sky. The helicopter will arrive in a few minutes. Will everything be okay? The Hermann Helms is cruising through the Elbe estuary near Cuxhaven. The final preparations are underway. This ship is awaiting the German Army helicopter. The two crews want to practice various winch maneuvers with the heavy helicopter hovering just a few meters above the ship.
We have to quickly pick up speed and reverse if anything happens so the helicopter can veer off forwards. If we stood still, the downwash would be too violent so the ship would drift away. Things are always different depending on the situation. The wind and current are coming from different directions and the water depths are different. It's never boring.
The Sea King flies over the Hermann Helms at low altitude. Communication is by radio and very soon also by sight.
We usually start by winching a weight down onto our foredeck and then a person.
The Sea King is now headed directly for the Hermann Helms. The flight engineer is positioned at the side door. The soldier will be controlling the electric winch. He maintains visual contact with the ship and communicates with the pilot by radio. Down on deck, Horst Schöbel and Anne Fröse are getting ready for the maneuver. Their most important tool during the exercise is a wooden pole with a metal arm and a ground cable. Without it, they risk getting an electric shock.
The friction in the air produces voltage. We ground everything so it doesn't go through a person's feet and body when they descend.
Final arrangements by radio.
2 quarters astern and we're ready.
The helicopter performs its first maneuver. Total concentration among the pilots and crew on the Hermann Helms. The helicopter comes very close to the ship. Coxswain Timo Wieck moves the Hermann Helms into position and sets the engines to slow astern. A soldier is lowered from the helicopter. The foredeck looks tiny. This is where he has to land. The Hermann Helms reverses slightly. The pilot follows with the helicopter and holds the Sea King in position. Only then can the soldier reach the foredeck. Precision work in the air and on the water. Coxswain Timo Wieck maintains the course and keeps his eyes on the instruments. The depth gauge is crucial now. If the ship runs onto a sandbank and stops abruptly, the helicopter will fly into the mast. The search and rescue cruiser reverses slightly. The soldier is suspended in mid-air but is nearly there. Just a few more meters to the foredeck. In the helicopter, the technician is seated at the electric winch. He determines the load's speed and direction. Nearly there. Horst Schöbel and Arne Fröse grab the soldier with the ground cable first, so that nobody gets an electric shock. Then they free him from his harness. The helicopter remains in its waiting position. The soldier will soon be going back up, but not on his own. This is a classic rescue maneuver in which a helper takes a second person on board the helicopter. Down on deck, the final details are discussed. The pilot and coxswain Timo Wieck maintain their course. The Sea King is only hovering a few meters above the ship. Because both are in motion, the helicopter's engines are cooled by the headwind. Arne Fröse is now joined to the soldier and will soon be ascending. In the helicopter, a second soldier is now controlling the electric winch. Under their uniforms, all of the soldiers are wearing survival suits that keep them warm and afloat for hours. But a maneuver that ends in the water would still be a disaster. Arne Fröse is off. Both quickly leave the boat. Arne Fröse is wearing a chest harness and is secured. The soldier is also gripping him with his legs. That stabilizes them both in the air, which is important when they're dangling from the steel cable. The helicopter is now hovering about 20 meters above the Hermann Hems's foredeck and slightly to the side of the Hermann Hems in the air. The crew monitors the maneuver. Higher up, Arne Fröse is dangling from the steel cable with the soldier. They've nearly made it. Now they arrive. Entering the helicopter is simple. They made it. Sea rescuer Arne Fröse is up in the air for now. The helicopter flies off to perform an aerial maneuver and will set the sea rescuer down again when it returns. A successful maneuver.
Flying's not really my thing.
Why not?
That thing up there vibrates quite a lot, and you're just dangling helplessly by the cable. Going to sea is much more my thing.
The exercise is finished, but the sea rescuer's day is far from over. An uncertain night is ahead of them. Reacting in seconds and functioning in any situation. That's what characterizes the sea rescuers and has saved many people's lives. Gordon Mavis is on his way to his workplace. The shrimp fisherman often leaves very early in the morning and remains out at sea for several days. His profession is sometimes hard, but Gordon Mavis is his own master on his own cutter. It's a family tradition and his dream job.
My grandfather was a fisherman, and my father also had his own company here. When I was a child, I knew I'd take over the company one day, and that's what I did.
Gordon Mavis has never been afraid. He knows the sea and nothing has ever happened. Until one day in April 2014, when everything changed. All of the nets were out when the boat suddenly tilted to the side.
I'll never forget April the 29th. It's burned into my mind. We were in this channel where my father used to fish. And that day the ship somehow turned on its side.
Listing slightly is nothing unusual when fishing. The fisherman was familiar with the area. He wasn't concerned yet.
However, I then tried to raise the outrigger, and I noticed the winch was having trouble and the ship suddenly listed. I noticed that there must be something heavy on it. I told a colleague I was setting off and might need help. Just as I said that, the ship suddenly tilted to the port side. It took 10, maybe 20 seconds. The ship moved so quickly, it just creaked a bit.
The cutter tipped onto its side in seconds. Perhaps the net got caught on the seabed. Gordon Mavis had no chance. Within seconds, the cutter capsized to the port side. Gordon Mavis and his crew were fighting for their lives. On the other side of the Elbe estuary, Timo Wieck was serving on the Hermann Hems that day. He remembers exactly.
That was 2 years ago, the fishing boat in the Wadden Sea. It was about 6 miles from its berth, got its net caught and capsized in seconds. That was really dramatic. Yeah, every second counts.
The Hermann Helms set out 3 minutes after the alert. In the cold North Sea, life or death is a matter of seconds and also depends on the coxswain making the right decisions. The Wadden Sea in the North Sea is quirky. In many places, the water is very shallow, and the Hermann Helms was unable to reach the capsized boat. So the daughter boat Biene was launched.
The Hermann Helms has a draft of 2.1 meters. The daughter boat has 80 centimeters. Boats often run aground in the Wadden Sea. We use Biene, the daughter boat, in shallow waters.
The Hermann Helms at full speed. Coxswain Timo Wieck knew that every second counted. Out in the cold water of the North Sea, Gordon Mayfus was fighting for his life.
I radioed Mayday, or tried to. Then I wanted to go out, but the water was already rushing in. And I said, oops, the ship's listing. I looked up and held on. Afterwards, I grabbed hold of the door frame and stood in the door until the thing had flooded. I couldn't do anything. I couldn't get away. If I'd let go, I would have been thrown backwards, and then it would have been over. I thought, you'll be gone in another 5 minutes.
The Hermann Helms didn't take long to get to the accident site. There were people in the water. Every second counted. The daughter boat was prepared for launching during the approach. The 2-man crew was ready.
When you split up, one navigator and an engineer go with the daughter boat, and one navigator and an engineer remain on the Hermann Helms.
The hook securing Biene shoots up. Launching only takes a few seconds. With its engine running, the daughter boat slips into the water before heading out to the capsized boat at up to 18 knots or over 30 kilometers per hour.
I pulled myself up as we were capsizing. When the ship was upside down, I was outside in the water. Of course, you're in shock. And then Biene was already coming. And when we saw them, yes.
Photos of the capsized boat show the hopeless situation. The ship is completely on its side. Gordon Mayfus had almost given up hope when the rescuers arrived.
What goes through your mind? No idea. At any rate, nah.
Gordon Mayfus needs some time after the accident. The memories are still fresh and his lightheartedness has gone, but he's recovered. Today, he owns a new cutter and enjoys his work again, in part because he knows he's not alone out there.
Of course you're grateful. As I said, if it weren't for the association, I wouldn't be sitting here. I'd be history. And that's a fact.
Gordon Mayfus owes the sea rescuers his life. The water in the North Sea is cold. Whoever goes overboard is in real trouble. Jens Kofal is a doctor. He's taken part in over 100 missions with the sea rescuers. He's experienced a lot during this time. When man overboard is sounded, it's always life-threatening.
The cold shock response kicks in immediately when a person falls into cold water. The blood pressure increases and you start to hyperventilate or breathe quickly. If there's a swell, you can immediately get water in your lungs. This response lasts for about 2 to 3 minutes and then abates slowly. If you've survived that, you try to remain afloat by swimming, but that becomes increasingly difficult because the nerves and muscles begin to shut down. And if you're not wearing a survival aid, a buoyancy aid, you drown.
Gordon Mayfus was lucky. He held onto the ship and the sea rescuers arrived in good time. He did everything right.
If you're far out at sea, you should try to hold on to a floating object and hold out until you're rescued. If you're with other people, you should gather together and hold on to one another. If you're close to the shore and there's no rescuer in sight and no floating object, you have no life jacket, and you've survived the initial phases, you can decide to risk swimming ashore. Although we know that people who are good swimmers in warm water aren't in cold water.
The cold water has proved fatal for lots of people.
There have been tragic accidents like the wife who tied her husband to the ship's side. She threw him a line and sailed into port, but she had been towing a dead husband. So the best thing is don't fall in the water. That's the most crucial thing.
Neustadt in Holstein. Sea rescuers and those who want to become one receive their training here. It's hard and pushes many people to their limits. When things get tough, the sea is merciless.
It's actually the basic training course for every sea rescuer. They join us from completely different professions.
I'm a tax investor in Lower Saxony. This is a complete change from what I do every day.
I've been with the sea rescuers for 6 months now. This is the first course that I've done.
No matter whether you're a newcomer or an old hand, the training is strenuous and realistic. Fitness is a must. The dangers at sea are countless and include leaks. But how do you seal something when water is shooting into the boat from outside at very high pressure? The sea rescuers push against the water with all their might, but that alone isn't enough to seal the leak.
All I can do is push something into the opening to minimize the incoming water. That gives me more time for further actions.
The course participants stuff foam material, blankets, life jackets, whatever they can find into the holes. This is how to gain valuable time in an emergency. It works. The leak is under control.
That was really interesting. It was incredible how much water can flow through a hole like that at high pressure. And it was a challenge to plug the leak, but it was really good fun. That can really happen, and it's an important experience and exercise that you have to have had so you're prepared for the worst case.
It's not always as easy as it looks. The sea rescuers are equipped with the latest technology and even rocket launchers. They use them to shoot lifelines to ships in distress. The recoil is enormous. The rocket with the rope flies around 30 meters.
I shoot a thin line to the distressed boat, and then I can fasten a long line, like a towing line, to it and get it to the boat. Let go. The line pulls itself in.
A bang, and seconds later, the rocket hits the target. Every sea rescuer is also a firefighter, because a fire on board can quickly end in a catastrophe. Every sea rescuer is given basic training in firefighting. Even choosing the right fire extinguisher is important, because helping can otherwise prove fatal. CO2 can suffocate the fire, but can also have the same effect on the rescuers if handled incorrectly.
It's dangerous in cramped, small spaces. We've used CO2 and it displaces the oxygen, not that you end up on the floor.
Although it looks pretty dangerous, the conditions at the training site are perfect. There's rarely this much space on a mission.
You won't find a perfect space like this anywhere else. There'll be angles and edges. So if you have to put out a fire, you'll have to go round corners.
Fires are lit and put out. Each participant has to complete every exercise.
There's always a danger, that's just how it is. You have to anticipate and deal with it.
The sea rescuer's real element is water. That's where they're at home. They have to know what they're doing to survive. It's often cold, but their clothing protects them.
I'm wearing an additional overall under my suit. It's lined, dry, and warm. These neoprene collars at the neck and wrists keep the suit dry inside as well.
But the suit only offers warmth and protection if it's put on properly, as some of the participants are going to find out. Life rafts inflate automatically in the water, but it isn't easy to get in them. Remaining together in the water is crucial to survival, because a whole group is much easier to spot than an individual. Whoever drifts off alone has little chance of surviving. That's why sea rescuers practice staying together in the water. Overcoming your own fears is also part of the training. It's a long way down from the quay wall. Scrambling up is strenuous, but without any swell, a whole lot easier than out at sea. Mistakes are still forgiven here. At sea, they could prove fatal.
There's water in the legs. Obviously, this suit wasn't completely fastened when we started, and we don't yet know where else it's got in. At any rate, I'm now carrying a couple of kilos of water.
Rescuing, extinguishing, recovering. The whole training program has to become second nature, so it's available in a split second when needed. Anybody can initially become a sea rescuer. The majority are volunteers, plus a few hundred permanent employees. The search and rescue is independent, financed purely through donations, and staffed by very special people. Sea rescuers keep their cool, serve a cause, and are part of a team. Nobody will get rich here.
When you're at sea on a mission, you get €4.60 an hour.
Search and rescue cruisers are special ships for the heaviest of seas on a mission. In the port, they're also the crew's home and dormitory. 4 men in a very cramped space. The chemistry has to be spot on.
Everything will be okay, right?
It's like guys sharing an apartment. We're together 24 hours a day for 14 days. If there's a bad apple there, it doesn't work. That's why everyone has a trial week on board before being recruited. We check to see whether he becomes part of the team or not.
Outside, the crew is making the pier shipshape. It's supposed to look nice and offer the sea rescuers a pleasant atmosphere.
Well, it's never boring here. We're trying to make everything clean and tidy, because after all, it's our home away from home. You're here on board for 6 months, and so you try to make things as nice as possible, so that you feel at home.
14 days together, the chemistry has to be right. Everyone's moody occasionally, but you get to know one another over time and know how to handle it.
After missions and exercises, the Hermann Helms takes fuel on board, and occasionally also fresh water. What's called bunkering takes place just around the corner in Cuxhaven's industrial port. Speed is essential here too. If an alarm suddenly comes, the Hermann Helms has to be ready.
Clear up the equipment, nothing's left lying around, we always have to be ready for the next mission. We don't know what it will involve, so the ship's always fully equipped as if it were brand new.
The tasks are clearly distributed, and the procedures are second nature. Engineer Kai Schütz is responsible for refueling on board, fuel and oil. The oil is supplied in canisters. Refueling is done by hand.
This is engine oil. We're getting 300 litres. When we do an oil change, we need oil. So we take the canisters and pour it into the tank over there.
After around 20 minutes, 300 litres of oil have been poured in. On the other side, 3,000 litres of fuel are being taken on board at the same time. Engineer Kai Schütz connects the fuel hose for the ship's diesel.
When we're refueling, we have to make sure that we don't spill any because of pollution. You have to watch out that nothing happens.
While the Hermann Helms is bunkering in Cuxhaven, everything opposite the port of Hamburg revolves around the weather. The German Weather Service closely monitors the situation on the coasts and at sea from its offices here. Sudden changes in weather can be dangerous, particularly for smaller boats.
An area of low pressure can approach within a few hours. And if a yachtsman is out on the water, he needs information quickly so that he can reach land again in good time if need be.
If a storm is approaching, the German Weather Service issues warnings through various channels.
Of course, I'm thinking about the safety of ships and people's lives when I issue warnings. That's why you don't usually issue warnings thoughtlessly. When you see a storm or an intense low-pressure system approaching, you're more likely to issue something sooner because you know that lives might be at stake.
Hurricanes, When they tear across the sea, things get hairy. Several meter-high waves make the sea unpredictable. Dirk Müller and his wife live just behind the levee in Cuxhaven. The two have been helped by the sea rescuers before. Whenever the Hermann Helms sets off for a mission in heavy seas, the experienced yachtsman's thoughts are with the crew.
We live directly behind the levee, maybe 400 meters from here. So when the search and rescue cruiser sets off in an emergency, the noise is carried across the levee to the first few houses, even in a storm or a hurricane. When you're lying in bed and the weather outside is awful, it makes you think, because you can well imagine what's going on out there, particularly at night. You don't want to be in their shoes. Then you think about the people they're going off to rescue. It's a completely different league when they go out.
The mood in the port is relaxed. Engineer Kai Schöps is trying his hand at telecommunications and gets some helpful tips from the neighbors.
Tie the rope around his neck when he goes up the ladder, then he won't fall so far.
Our man is a real comic.
Since you've got your life vest on, you'll have to stretch it to the other side.
What's that? I've got a life vest on.
Man, that's why they call it a balls-off belt.
Inside, it smells of food. The coxswain is cooking again today.
Time permitting, I usually do the cooking. The mission's more important, of course, but we try to look after ourselves. The other advantage is the cook doesn't do the dishes.
The men take care of themselves and go shopping once a week. If they receive an emergency call, even a full shopping cart is abandoned. Lunch is a ritual, with everybody sitting together at the table. Today, it's sea rescuer steak. Lots of meat on toast with mushrooms and onions. In the evening, everyone goes about his own business and enjoys what privacy there is on board.
Don't say I've got to cut that.
Everyone has his own room here. There are 4 of us. During the day, we deal with the ship. At some point, we call it a day. We're on board 24 hours a day, ready and waiting, but the daily routine is much the same as on land. Breakfast, lunch, supper. And everyone does his own thing in the evening. One reads, the other watches TV, one surfs the internet.
The German Weather Service has issued a storm warning for the evening. Gusts with wind force 7. At first, it means nothing to the crew of the Hermann Helms. The day draws to a close. During the night, a storm is raging off the coast. A small sports boat is bobbing around in the waves. An emergency call comes in. Someone is in danger out there. Apparently, a woman's operation scar has burst and she's bleeding heavily. So the sea rescuers request an emergency doctor. The men don't know exactly what's awaiting them. The sea is churning. Small boats have difficulty maneuvering.
The wind's blustery. We've been having squalls today. They might have set off in a wind force of 2 or 3 when they felt safe, and then it got up to 6 or 7.
It's pitch black as the Hermann Helms puts out to sea. The crew can only see something when it's completely dark on the bridge. Lots of ships are moving out at sea. There's a risk of collision. The harbor police is also on site, but unable to do anything because the sea's too rough.
Okay, we can't cross over, it's too choppy. We can only give you a bit of lee.
Giving lee means positioning the ship in the wind in front of the sports boat to protect it. For the crew of the Hermann Helms, that also means having to use the daughter boat Biene. In the pitch-black night, the crew boards with the emergency doctor. Kai Schöps releases the lock. The daughter boat slides into the angry sea. On the Hermann Helms, the men monitor the situation from the bridge and keep an eye on their surroundings. The radar shows Biene approaching the boat in distress. The waves are high and the daughter boat has to make sure it doesn't collide with the sports boat. A risky situation.
Our daughter boats just approached the other boat and transferred the doctor and probably one of us, but we couldn't tell from here.
We wanted to get the person over here, but we couldn't because of the swell. So we and the doctor went over with our emergency backpack, which proved very difficult. A 72-year-old patient was waiting for me on the boat. She'd fallen on board and couldn't get her breath. Plus, she was suffering from anxiety.
The woman can't remain on board the small boat. She needs to go to the hospital, but it's impossible to get the patient onto the sea rescuer's ship in the angry sea. The sports boat skipper is also exhausted.
He couldn't cope anymore. He was pretty much at the end of his tether. That's understandable. He was concerned because of his wife's injury.
The next port is only a few nautical miles away, but the water is very shallow. The search and rescue cruiser could run aground. The crew decides that Biene will accompany the distressed boat there.
We took her to port with the daughter boat and transferred her to the emergency service for treatment.
The journey to the port isn't easy because of the swell. The Hermann Helms lights up the water with its powerful searchlights. The sports boat also has to be kept on course.
It was important for us to look after the yacht's owner. I directed him so that he followed Biene.
There's nearly a collision with the daughter boat when the distressed boat comes too close.
Not so close or you'll run into me.
The waves slacken off in the shallow water. The daughter boat and the distressed boat arrive safely in the port.
1 meter 10 looks okay.
The Hermann Helms is positioned further out off the coast. The crew now lights up the harbor police's ship. It came into contact with the distressed boat, but nothing appears to be damaged. The patient was also transferred successfully.
The patient was transferred to the ambulance. Our crew and the doctor are coming back on board now.
Around the Hermann Helms, the sea remains choppy and a sharp wind is blowing. Biene returns to the search and rescue cruiser, and Anne Fröse has difficulty entering the tight space at the stern. The daughter boat has to hit the carriage to be pulled up. With skill and momentum, Anne Fröse steers the daughter boat onto the Hermann Helms stern. At 2:30 a.m., they return to their home port. The night will be a short one, but the sea rescuers are satisfied.
All in all, pretty good. The weather was a bit violent for such a small boat with a swell of 1.5 meters. Things could have gone differently, but we can be satisfied with the outcome.
In that weather, things could have gone far differently. It's quiet on board on the way back. Everyone seems to be lost in his own thoughts. What will the rest of the night bring? And what about the next day? The sea rescuers of the Hermann Helms don't know. But they'll be there when help is needed, heading out to sea when others seek safe haven.